Hello there and a warm welcome to the Citizens Chat Show here on Civic Space TV. We're streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Judith Atim, and it's always a pleasure to have you join us on these critical conversations that are playing out in our public discourse, and it's also an opportunity for you to be a part of the conversation. You can do this by dropping us a comment in the comment section. We always read your comments and we are glad to see as many of them come through. Now, today we are tackling a rather complex and pressing issue that affects countless individuals, including you and your loved ones. Well, it's a topic that demands our attention, our understanding, and definitely our collective action. We are talking about human trafficking, labor mobility, and the rights of migrant workers. The plight of Ugandans abroad, especially in the Gulf states, is an issue that many Ugandans already know, they are aware of. Some of you have loved ones working over there. Some of you have sadly lost your loved ones under painful and questionable circumstances. We're also having this discussion in the wake of the recent BBC Africa Eye documentary, Death in Dubai, in which it shines a spotlight on the exploitative and dark world of human trafficking, sexual slavery, and so on, involving a lot of young Ugandans who are actually being lured into these kinds of dark acts. And this, of course, has triggered a wave of critical conversations on this very topic. And joining me is quite a thin panel today. I have with me Dr. Sarah Bireete, Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. Warm welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, viewers.
We also have the pleasure of having with us Mr. Joseph Ochieno. Mr. Ochieno is a political commentator. He's also UBC Idelogue. Always a pleasure to have you join us on the show.
Thank you for having me. Rather thin panel. Since we're talking humanity, we get rather concerned when some of our colleagues are missing in action, but here we are.
Good to have you. So, well, just to let you know, of course, a little bit of the context here. Human trafficking, what is it? It's just a modern day form of slavery in simple terms. And this kind of exploitation can take many forms, including forced labor, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and even forced criminality. And this criminal enterprise of human trafficking is closely linked to labor mobility, which is the movement of people from one place to another, just in search of employment opportunities. And this can be within a country or across borders, but for many, it's a way to find a better job opportunities and to improve their lives and the lives of their loved ones, which is why we see a lot of our young people boarding planes and crossing over to other countries. However, this desire for a better life can make individuals vulnerable to traffickers who prey on their hope and desperation. In our region, we're seeing a significant increase in people migrating for work, often to the Middle East. They're lured by promises of high-paying jobs, but all too often they end up in exploitative situations, sometimes falling victim to trafficking. And this brings us to the crucial subject of how to protect the rights of migrant workers. And so I'll start with you, Dr. Sarah Bireete. From a legal perspective, where does the government's responsibility lie when it comes to protecting the rights and lives of its citizens beyond borders?
First of all, it's a constitutional mandate of government to protect its persons and property, as well as the borders. The question would be, what then happens outside the borders? So long as any person is documented as Ugandan, the obligation of government remains. That's why we have immigration tracking, border patrol, border enforcement, bodies tracking entry of global citizens from one country to another with proper documentation. That's why if you don't have a passport, you find that your temporary travel document, for example, for Ugandan, it can only take you within Africa. And I think it could be problematic for countries like South Africa to enter with that temporary travel document, because where are they going to place the visa? Because they have a strict visa regulatory system, even where maybe for citizens where visa has been waived. But I think it will be difficult for countries like South Africa to enter with a temporary travel document. So that's how serious tracking of movements of global citizens is. So when it comes to labor protection, I think the question we should ask in general is how committed is the Ugandan government or current regime to protection of labor rights within and outside Uganda. We don't have a minimum wage. We have an archaic, labor employment laws. The attempt to to amend them and update them has been not easy. Our minimum wage, I think, still reads like that of independence. So you find that even protection of labor rights in the country is problematic. Apart from labor rights, we have also a regime that does not take serious its duty to protect fundamental rights and freedoms, under which labor rights fall. So if you have a regime that can watch on as continuous enforced disappearances happen in the country, as torture, as brutality happens, do you think that they will be moved to run to the rescue of people we are trafficking abroad as domestic workers largely? Because 84% of migrant workers from Uganda are domestic workers. And out of these, almost, if not all, the documented figures indicate that they are women. So you have a crisis of migrant labor rights going on continuously. It's important also to note that many of the dealers in the labor export business are highly connected individuals in Uganda. And it's no wonder that majority of these countries are dominated by Westerners, the Gambanogu. So even the man on the spot, Mwesigwa, I know that there are people in Buganda who are called Mwesigwa, but he is Mnyankole. Yeah. So you find that the human trafficking business is dominated by politically connected people who enjoy impunity from the regime. The big names that have been thrown around in people who have done research on who is engaged in labor export. Sometimes it was even the former speaker, then you find members of the first family, then you find really highly connected people engaged in this business. Even the indirect or unseen directors could be these people. So you find almost most of these big shots have a company doing this business, and that's why it has become so hard to regulate and tame. The third issue that comes on the spot on this matter is the quality of consular services that we offer Ugandans abroad. Because any Ugandan out of the territorial integrity of the country finds themselves now under the protection of the consular services for that region. Whether there is an embassy in the country you visited or not, there is always an overseeing consular entity that should be responsible, come to your aid if the regime was taking its work on the protection of Ugandans seriously, which I personally think it doesn't, and that's why we find ourselves having this debate. And as I conclude as part of my preamble, it's always painful to find the young girls at the airport covered in those Muslim clothes. Some of them, the first time they receive a passport is when they've touched at the airport. If from these companies trafficking them. It's always
Most of them, actually.
a painful sight. And I think on a daily, we could be having about 2,000 young people, majority women, leaving Uganda, being trafficked. Common airlines is Ethiopia Airlines, Fly Dubai, and those I think are the most that take most of these people. And then those other, you know, funny airlines where you find that if you want tea, you pay. If you want, you know, something that really I had never imagined in the time I've been traveling. That an airplane works as a restaurant. Give me chapati, give me what, and people are paying instead of having proper services on where a ticket comes with these services automatically. So these are some of the airlines, also short the airlines that are engaged in trafficking Ugandans.
It's interesting. I actually the bit of chapati, and I'm trying to imagine that happening. Do these things actually happen like that?
Yeah, where people pay and
That's
you pay for whatever you consume on the airline, and like where it is part of the ticket. It's very crazy.
I need to know which airlines those are, and I just avoid boarding them completely. But Joseph, let's come to you. When you look at this phenomenon of human trafficking, how does it reflect on our social and economic policies post-independence?
Why do you want to take me to independence?
Post.
But I think, I think it helps to give context. But I must say that the disclaimers are apparently globally, in particular the global north, where air travel is much more of a border business. There are low-cost airlines.
Where but it's like restaurants.
No, where the services is that it may be 10 kilograms only. And if it's not more than 10 kilos of hand luggage, you pay for the other. So basically low cost, meaning small business. And that in there, you know, you might travel from London Luton to maybe Dublin, and you buy the tea. Now, remember, it's low cost. So meaning that you're going to pay possibly more than maybe 20% of what you pay for a normal flight. So what this tells you on this terrible continent of mine, which is my home, and I'm an African, it's telling you that these criminals are linking up to these crude airlines networks to do business on the people. So I repeat, low-cost air service is not a problem, you know?
Yeah.
So it happens globally. It is simply that if you're traveling from Entebbe to, in this case, arguably Bulawayo, you know, if the usual flight ticket would be $3,000, I mean $600, which is another terrible thing on this continent. You're still charging on dubious dollars, kind of stuff. You will get a low-cost airline which possibly goes on odd hours, and instead of setting off from Entebbe, you might settle from Tororo. You know, if those airports are still there, and you say pay $200. Now, if that is business of capitalism and crudeness, it makes sense. But because you brought it here at Kampala, and I didn't know about that, it's telling you that this bunch of criminals are using dubious airlines and charging excess maximum, making excess maximum amount of money out of the human citizen of Uganda. Does it make sense? So in other words, it's not only that, well, the Saudi mullahs are going to pay them $10,000 and they only give your family, you know, if you're lucky, 800, you know, and the air ticket goes for $1,000 for argument's sake. But now they're looking for an airline which will take you for $200. That basically is that. And I thought I would need to deal with that, because that must really be that. Now, it tells you how crudely criminal it is. You took me, since we took post-independence, Migration is a historic thing, you know. Jesus faced it, you know. An element of forced migration there, too. The faith in which now all end up getting first names from the Middle East, you know, is that the churches that we belong to, you know, they moved from there and then went to Macedonia and ended up in Rome and others into Canterbury in Britain. And so here we are. Migration. Whether those were missionaries selling the word or selling gold and others bits, fine. In our case, pre-independence, the forced migration element closer here was those of the Banyarwanda coming into Uganda. Element of this pre the revolution of 1959, we had our communities, African communities, who, for various reasons, I am from Butere, I can go and find myself in Tungamo and do potatoes and make money and then return to the end. Fine. Migration. And maybe it may even be in the kingdom of Rwanda at the time, whatever it is. You know, it is cheaper for me to go and heap potatoes with the Baganda. After all, they'll give you a kingdom, maybe even give you a wife, or sometimes give you a cow to go back with. Fine. 1959, we already had people settled in Kisoro and other places, forced migration. As a matter of policy, the African leading towards independence say that no, when our people, and if our people are running away from Rwanda for righteous reasons, you need to allow them in. Of course, you know what I've been trying to say. Our peoples come into Uganda, the British were saying no. Borderless kind of thing. Our policy remains to date. You realize I'm not making it very political. Some people think I'm making, you know, whatever. And today, here we are, generally a massively generous country. Judith, a few days ago, I found myself at what we used to call the Valley in Makerere, down here between Makerere University and
The slum.
yes, and
Chekoni?
in Wandega and
Okay.
and
Kataza.
Bulago, yeah. Whole neighborhood has now been taken by Sudanese refugees. Now, this is a shock thing for me. Literally whole neighborhoods. Businesses have closed. These guys have taken over properties. Now, it's sort of akin to whatever is happening in Kansang over Eritreans and others. Sarah, the political question is, what is it that in this Republic of Uganda we have nearly open borders away from the refugee question, for which I'm a scholar? What is it that this happens, but every day thousands of decent young Ugandans are being slave shipped and airlifted out of this country? What exactly is going on? So this is a conversation which, when you initially you invited me and asked me to, yeah, you can see, look at it. But you know, Sarah, actually this is a conversation we should be having, possibly at Kololo. There's something fundamentally wrong. The human trafficking thing, meaning the export of our citizens for exploitation, use and abuse, including, again, I think I told you, it was only a few months ago by this era that I got to know the sexual business element of it in the Middle East. You know? So if you see what our people have been subjected to in recent times, the displacement of our people in communities, in the north communities, in the east communities, in Sakasese, the history of migration, the southern end that I bring you, the question of our peoples, Rwanda, our peoples who are now part of our communities. What's going on? It's politics. You know, as a continent, why should it be us? I was a local government officer in UK, a senior local government officer, and I was also a senior member of the British Labour Party at the peak leading to the debates, this is way before Brexit, but also about these so-called boat people jumping over the Mediterranean to go into Europe. And as Sarah was saying, the usual topical thing would be very basic around people living wars and looking for jobs and wages and things like that. In a way, partly true, and I got very deeply appreciative of this. But the bottom line is, there is no average person from Norway who today is seeking to migrate out of Norway and prepared to put their lives at risk. For the two of you talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah?
So, yeah. So on that note, I'm also wondering, do we need some kind of fundamental policy shifts to create, a self-sustaining or a self-sufficient economy that it allows people to be absorbed at home instead of, seeking opportunities in potentially dangerous environments and endangering their lives at the same time?
Basically, I was being shy. I was speaking in tongues like Norbert Mao sometimes would be. I was trying to tell you that actually, quite clearly, it is ironical that we have entire neighborhoods now, 2 neighborhoods I know in Kampala, big neighborhoods, being taken over by people of non-Ugandan, indigenous non-Ugandan communities, and with hotels and restaurants, and they're finding it very comfortable, to live, but our people are being shipped to. There is an imbalance that exists.
It's a paradox.
It's a failure of government, as Sarah was trying to say. And I also know, because we get feedbacks on these programs, there are some people who actually think that we come on these programs and our job is basically to bash NRA. And the job is basically to lament about absence of leadership. No. If NRA doesn't go to be bashed, and of course I don't bash NRA, we don't. They should just do this decent thing. Provide the very basic, and that is protection of lives and properties of the citizens of this country. Create enabling environments in which our up-to-date resources are used for the benefit of our people. I am a socialist, as I am an African. I'm a progressive leftist, as I am. Do you know what we do? You talk about, and I think Sarah was talking about minimum wage. Interestingly, actually, decent economies, even without minimum wage, although I believe in principle of minimum wage, decent economies, even without minimum wage, basically means you basically provide decent wages enough for people that the lower bid could even be catered for by the market. Although the principle is minimum wage cautions use and abuse of and exploitation of citizens. But really, ideally, at the moment, it's not even about this minimum wage. What is urgently the subject of conversation is level of employment in this country, job opportunities in this country. One, job opportunities. But I've also had a conversation, Sarah, with people who found themselves there and who are seeking to find themselves out there. And by the way, because we meet in social spaces, I'm sure some people actually come to you very innocently. They think you've got ways to lead them out, let alone those who actually ask you for advice. No, some people live here, and by the way, you're going through another election charade period. Some people, actually, those people who are lining up, some of them are lining up for jobs. Some of them are lining up because they fear disappearances. Those conversations have been said. Many of these people talk to me. They fear disappearance, political instability. So I'd rather go to the Middle East, get my few $1,000s, but basically survive. So it's absence of governance, absence of politics, absence of substance. Apart from the younger ones, there are many of these girls who, unfortunately, and you guys, man, young Ugandan men, there are some of these guys who use girls, create children, become irresponsible. You meet a few young mothers with children, they don't know how to pay school fees. They leave their poor children who are in terrible situations with their grandmothers, but then they go abroad in order to raise money for school fees for their children.
Thank you. So, Sarah, let me come to you still on the issue of the policy shift that can actually help us create a buffer by ensuring that we have some kind of a self-sustaining or self-sufficient economy to support our own talent or workers. And I was just hoping that Major Witch would be here, because I know many times if you bring this question to the government, they'll say, well, we are prioritizing socioeconomic transformation through wealth creation. We have programs to skill the young people, but we do not see all the skilling hubs translating to, something that can actually stem this wave of movement of young people out of this country. What are we missing?
Let me answer your question using the famous, new pet or kid on the block, the parish development model. If you give farmers in the village 1 million, which is given through their circle for security purposes, two things are likely to happen. One is that most of the women who have received this money are in poultry or piggery. And they will find that they have no market because they are producing the same things. Two, if you start poultry using 1 million shillings, I know that for people who have no means of income, it's better than nothing. But if you start poultry using 1 million shillings, how many birds are you going to make? Do you construct a proper, house for these birds? And how about the feeding and maintenance before they start laying eggs to make you an income? So is 1 million sufficient? Maybe it could enable you 20 birds or so, 30. Yeah, maybe. But how about the other elements of feeding, of medication, especially the young ones, the care needed, and how sustainable is it? So tomorrow they start laying eggs. Will it be self-sustaining immediately? What is the long-term side of that, economic speaking? The men who have received this money, most of them are doing boda. So if you go to buy a bike, 3.5 million. Most of I'm told there is a company attached to Total that is doing electric or diesel rechargeable bikes, the climate smart bikes. 3.5, I think, is the average. So you have 1 million deposit, meaning that you're going to get this motorcycle on credit. And the money you're making is for repaying the balance of 2.5 with interest. So when will you, and then the fuller that people will pay back this money, where does it come from? Whether you are rearing hens, whether you are in poultry, or whether you've bought a boda, where is this money coming from? Do you see it coming through? No. By 1 year, the costs of maintaining these birds, I know it could be easier because birds you could do local feeding, whatever, a bit of free range, you throw in part of what you consume at home. Yeah, maybe the birds will survive, part of the piggery, but I don't see people making money and having surplus for paying back to government. So those are the few beneficiaries, and this is the most, I think, successful program so far of economic empowerment, and it has these challenges. By the time the man finishes servicing the boda loan, he has also obligations to meet at home. So maybe half the income, let me say a bike can make 300,000 a week. So, but that's urban. That's, I don't know whether in rural, you can make that money. Maybe you put it at 150 a week in the rural areas. Then you find that 70,000 goes into servicing the loan, 70,000 goes into home obligations, school fees, health care, a little bit of feeding, because life in the countryside is cheap because most people have land, where to stay, where to till the land and feed yourselves. You find you buy maybe like 10% of the things at home. So let's assume it is that. So where is the money to pay government? At most, it will have uplifted these households out of poverty, make them live slightly a normal life that they couldn't have afforded. But I don't think they can pay back because I don't see this money. So when it comes to other programs that have gone to the youth, women, whatever loans, still you need a registered business to access this. During COVID, when we would come from travel and then we are going through that Ministry of Health check, I found a young girl from Masaka, stranded, qualified teacher. She had gone abroad to look for greener pastures. She reached there, same scenario with most of the people. I'm sure there's also a former parliamentary candidate in Ntungamo that was stranded in the UAE. Now you see the stories of Mwesugu and the victims of women, and we all know what we've been watching with prostitution in Dubai, dehumanization, slave queens going there, and the inhumane things that are done. Some of them we can't even speak about them. So, but out of poverty. So I think for me, including the Africans that drown in the Mediterranean, running out from poverty in Africa, I think Africa generally has to face the man in the mirror, the man, woman in the mirror. We look at ourselves and our vampire leaders that cannot develop the naturally endowed countries of Africa to benefit the people. So we have vampire leadership, largely in Africa, that cannot develop their economies, that cannot develop their people, and have pushed poor people to the edge. And that's the problem.
So, Joseph, I want us to talk about, I mean, Sarah talks about creating, of course, all these opportunities at home so that we don't have people moving elsewhere across the continent. But you gave a very interesting, a paradox of a country that is so hospitable to others, yet it cannot provide safeguards for its own young people seeking greener pastures or better opportunities elsewhere. But then here I am just wondering, when you look at also our opposition parties, political parties and actors, do you think they've also been articulating these issues strongly enough, holding government accountable enough for its failures to actually provide safeguards for its own citizens?
You know, when I was asking you, when I was thanking you for putting this on the national table, I was suggesting to you that maybe we should be having this conversation at Kololo or perhaps at Nambole. I was trying to emphasize how important it is. And if the so-called democratic opposition were doing their jobs, that's where it would be. In fact, Sarah, part of the conversation I'm saying is when I broke that and when I took it to 69 and I was trying to avoid giving contextual credit to UPC and the leadership, so let's talk about leadership. That is the missing link on this continent. One. Two, politics of issues. Ideologically driven. You know, if we had leaders, which at the moment I'm worried, if we had political leaders who are driven by issues, and when I gave you Norway, I was telling you that a political opposition, if there was one in Uganda, that addresses these issues. These are issues that in normal democracies would be talking about unemployment. In normal issues we talk about, as he says, a minimum wage. We don't talk about it at Civic Space as a by-the-by conversation between Ochieno and Sarah Bireete on some Thursday, Friday, Saturday afternoon, but as a matter of electoral outcome. And that's why for these days, thanks to social media, you will see election by this. Sometimes I forget because I don't watch global TV very much because I hadn't had time. You know, you see when they say the American thing, they talk about the economy, but they say, oh, interest rates rose and it became an issue. Unemployment levels went and they lost a government. Cost of living did, and there was a revolution in Nepal. This is, so you're absolutely right. Today, nominations are next week. What is NRA's position on these issues? Who's challenging them? You know, you guys in the fourth estate, but away from us, you need to be asking Mr. Museveni about this. You need to be asking, including by the local city councillors, including my good friend Lukwago, not to centralize the political element. You know, this is what's happening. How comes an entire neighborhood of Kampala? What are you doing as a local authority policy? Let's debate and have this. What shields are you putting to the local citizens, the local communities? You know, where does central government come? In other organized nation states, Sarah, if, say, Ishaka is burdened by a sudden issue, maybe of a settlement that has arisen out of an issue, say from Rwanda or from Kabale, as a result of maybe an unforeseeable situation, yeah? The local authorities uses their local facilities on the basis of the mandate they've got to provide for citizens or people in those communities. Central government comes to cushion. You see? Or then they work with central government to say this is what we will do. What are the issues? So how comes a particular part of Makerere is now surrounded by a particular community about which possibly the local communities have got no say? And where some have got a say, a group of landlords, normally landlords predominantly, people who are making money. Do you know why I was pushing the Makerere thing? Apparently right now as we speak, most of these accommodations were hostels, student hostels. You know what's happening? They are now so expensive, students have been pushed away. They're now so expensive that average parents from Nagongera and others, including from Tunga, because they will be there, who are struggling, because sometimes in this country, we sometimes forget that is generally a national thing, most one can't pay these. It's not be surprising that maybe some of these ones who drop out find themselves being victims for this Entebbe trip. Today, at lunch, I was served by an economics graduate. Fantastic young, beautiful lady from Western Uganda. Just finished her economics, but you know what? She's working down there and when I was trying to push, because I do have these conversations, it is sort of like, well, beyond my graduation, I'm not quite sure whether I'm generally going to get a job in a related field. Right now, I think this week, Friday, public service conversations are taking place about people for public service jobs. I know fantastic young economists from a powerful an accountant parent, but they don't have jobs for the last 2 years. And they're basically busy praying that they get shortlisted. So these are the issues. No. Politics has gone terrible. Politics of issues are absent. I'm not quite sure whether in the political opposition, don't call it democratic opposition, in the political opposition, we have people who are leaders who are basically trying to help push on political issues. But granted, the space for a national conversation in which NRM can be challenged on issues, unfortunately, is not there. So it's the crudeness of politics, in this country, and so it is the crudeness of politics on the African continent. Why I told about the 1959, as early as 1963 when the Organization of African Unity was founded, not only were our founding parents totally committed to borderless Africa, the forced migration we talk about in the movements of our peoples, but they were also totally committed to full independence of Africa. Not only were they committed to that, I told you that, well, moving towards the later part of the 60s, our independence leaders were talking about national democratic liberation. And when you talk about national democratic liberation, from the liberation of political liberation, here you talk about national emancipation of the African citizen. So it's about rule of law, guaranteed access to public service and health and education, and emancipation, economic emancipation of our people. What are they saying at the time? They're saying our gold will be ours, and they're saying, what are we saying? That imperialist mechanized companies that were doing our tobacco, our cotton, things like that no, they'll have to give way, for our indigenous companies to contextualize. But also, what are we doing? The cooperative movement will make sure that we're able to sustain our people. Sarah, I have met, as you do, and as all of us meet, people from both home and abroad. Many, many, many Africans, forgetting about these massively used and rapidly used in the Middle East. We all have friends and relatives who are in the global north, who are earning relatively hugely, but some of whom are willing to take 80% pay cut for them to return home here, if those jobs will be available, if the environment will be safe for them, if they will be guaranteed that they will have access to their NSSF whenever they need, and that if their livelihoods will be guaranteed, but most importantly, that the children will be able to have access to an average Chinoni secondary school, primary school, but to be able to go to Berenyanje without challenges, and that from Berenyanje, they're going to be guaranteed that they'll be the celebrators of tomorrow. That is the massive failure we face as a continent. In fact, even as Sarah was talking about South Africa, I expect to be within South Africa in the next several, not so many months. And part of the conversation I want to have is to have a public debate, including this question of migration. Because many of our friends in South Africa do not know that we gave lives for the liberation of Southern Africa, including South Africa. That for me, I lost a government because of the liberation struggle in South Africa, including on the support of the African National Congress. So I find it actually crude and difficult that in South Africa, today I will have to go to South Africa and justify myself. And to make an important point, In the early 90s, as part of our campaigns for democracy in this country, do you know the political leadership position I took? Now I'm trying to boast, but to blackmail the political leaders in giving you a response that you give. I told Blair's first foreign minister, Gordon Brown, rather Robin Cook, who short-lived, and his home affairs minister, at a time when we were having a rally over this thing about migration issues, because these are normally global issues, you know, we said to them that you guys, you're talking about immigration and immigrants, and they're trying to find policies to check this, including so-called people who come from Europe. I said, no, as far as Africa is concerned, review your foreign policies, stop supporting brutal dictators that chase our citizens out of Africa, stop supporting brutal dictators that steal and thieve our monies, you know, and all of us will leave these places and go there, and you'll not be finding Africans leaving Africa to come here. Finally, did you know that people normally want to think that I have other citizenships? I don't. One of the reasons why I refused British citizenship deliberately was to convey a message. I am an African and I'm a Ugandan. And I'm also trying to tell this because I'm trying to go down there, people think that you want their country so much. Actually, our people desperately need those countries. But I'm also trying to say that no, those of us as leaders, since you talk about political leaders, we should work towards creating an enabling environment here at home so that our people don't have to move on. So now that I'm conveying this to our friends in NRM, please, let's mobilize our resources towards building and enabling an enabling economy, an enabling environment in which our people don't want and don't have to look for going forward. In 1992, my last remark, in 1992, which you know, is a good story, one of Mr. Museveni's first trips to UK when, you know, first public trip to Uganda, talk to Ugandans. We a predominant majority were refugees to the Commonwealth Secretariat. And so Mr. Museveni came and talked to the guy abused us, man. He said, you know, you guys are here. We don't care, so long as we're getting money from you. You know, that quote is there. Mr. Museveni told the crowd that for him, he doesn't care if people went there, so long as they're getting money. And at that time, he's saying, we're getting $30 million a month from you guys, so we're okay. So my concluding remarks is this. So if you get a leadership, a political leadership on this continent, that is bothered about making money from you, and that's an official policy, and then you're insulting the people who have escaped from your country, and instead of persuading them and calming them down, that is your message to them. Oh.
So, well, it's funny. It's sad, but it's also funny.
I'm a sad man.
So, Sarah, does it concern you that our political parties do not seem to flag this issue of migrant workers or human trafficking as a very important issue by at least even having it captured in their manifestos? Is this something that should concern all of us as citizens?
You know, first of all, we need to acknowledge that in the absence of a functional ruling party, I know which Paula would have protested if he was here, but NRM is just like a group of entrepreneurs in scramble and petition for the country. I don't think that it's an organized political establishment to write home about. So everybody's fighting for space at the table, the quarrel for, and the bribery and violence for sake. Everybody's fighting for if their hand can reach on the national cake. And I don't think they care about the polity of the nation and the quality of leadership that they offer. Having said that, so in the absence of a normal, functional, respectable ruling party, then you don't expect functional opposition parties. Because opposition to what? Opposition to what? NRM also has hijacked state organs and infrastructure, and it's just like opposition to the state. Yet the state should belong to everybody. But NRM owns the state. So you have people outside the state, and that's what we call opposition. Then, of course, they are battered left, right, and center, but also they have, apart from the context I think they have also not focused their minds properly on what needs to be done. Maybe they don't think that Uganda will one day exist, because they are also not showing anything promising in terms of saying we are here, we can better be organized, we can do better, and Uganda deserves better. You don't see that from the opposition. So where does that leave the citizen, especially in the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms, and now the labor rights that are on the spot? Migration labor per se is not a bad thing. Human nature has always evolved, moved, right from the story of creation. Because if creation happened wherever it happened, because God and Jesus operated in areas that, if they are physical, they are at least. Some people say the Garden of Eden was around the River Nile and whatever. But, so those, yeah. No. You know, when you try to interpret those biblical things, so but let's leave those in the Bible. Because even Israel, that is talked about a lot in the Bible, I think Israel meant people than the geographical expression we see on earth. Yeah, so some of those things are biblical than, you know, we shouldn't struggle to make them earthly things. So you find that movement per se for better pay, for better welfare, for improved conditions wouldn't be bad. But the question that remains then is, how should these countries, if there are labor opportunities in the Middle East, for example, tomorrow there might be labor opportunities somewhere else. I know that in the US a long time ago, when there were labor opportunities, people captured slaves and took them there to work in the plantations instead of doing proper migration. So, but now we have this modern day enslavement in terms of human trafficking. And a report by the Global Fund indicates that 2024 indicates that 89% of Ugandans that have gone as migrant workers have conditions consistent with human trafficking. 89%.
It's a big number.
Yeah.
Very big number.
So you are talking about literally everybody, with a margin of 11% that are safely exchanging their labor for a better pay outside Uganda. So you find that this statistic is really worrying, and the gaps expressed in these findings, you find that some of the gaps are in the recruitment methods, bad recruitment practices with higher risk of exploitation. People are not even told the truth. Your family is told, make money, do this. Some of these people are told even some of the salary will come to them. They never see it. People have sold land, property to make their people travel. Most of them use these exploitative methods. The report further indicates that the kafara or sponsorship system in the Gulf countries ties workers' legal status to their employer, restricting workers' ability to change jobs, leave the country, or complain without risk. So this suppresses the people and makes them slaves. You can't complain. You are tied to your worker. The common story is phone, confiscation of phone and passport, and then all these things happening without seeking redress. Lack of oversight in recruitment, both here in Uganda and abroad, how our process is done. And then, of course, weak enforcement of labor. Then you have the mental and physical consequences, health consequences because of harsh working conditions, abuse, isolation, injuries, stress. And we have quite a number of people that have died. You know, many people wait thinking their family, somebody is going to uplift them and only to receive, you know, to return as part of cargo back to their countries. Then you have another worrying trend, is an indicator that the number of Ugandans who are stranded or in distress is just on the increase, with over 350 reported detained in Saudi Arabia and UAE under various legal troubles or being stuck without proper documentation. So when you have these actions, and my point is, what should then happen, or where are the best practices of well or proper protection of migrant labor? I think some of the best practices are found in the Philippines, which has an overseas workers welfare administration, as well as the overseas employment administration. So both nationally and abroad in the Philippines, you have a strong commission in charge of recruitment. So you're not sent by private vampires exploiting poor people. You apply to go and work abroad through a government agency. And wherever you go, you are taken by your government, and there's another overseas agency taking care of your welfare instead of complaint, issues, checking on you, visiting your place of work. And Philippines has harvested more money from migrant labor exploitation because the process includes a commission for government. It's a government to government. You want this kind of nurses in your hospital in Saudi Arabia, you are talking to a government. And the government will say, I have well-trained nurses, maybe I can reach 200, and these are their categories, and this is the pay they will get. But also on top of charge that, then they tell the government what would be like the tax, the fees now that come to government. So it's also a source of revenue when it's properly managed, and some of these procedures have been blocked. India, Sri Lanka have also good mechanisms that could be benchmarked from taking care of the general welfare of the people, their expertise, working abroad and making sure they are safe, can access their family, but also return home safely. And this is what is largely the problem of Uganda, that what would be official business, creating employment. Also to underscore the fact that we have higher levels of youth unemployment in the country, there are limited job opportunities for young people, and young people have found themselves on the wall. The influx of those who seek to go and find maybe a way around life. But when you have a government which looks at this as an opportunity to enrich a few, and that is common with our corruption tendencies by the people in power.
So the example of Philippines that you just read, and the fact that the categories you give sound to be like professional, people who've gone to school, professional workers.
Both qualified and semi and unskilled.
Like the kind that
they have the
exporting.
Categories, yes. They have all the categories,
because
but they take care of
there
them.
is also the argument and assumption that the fact that Uganda exports a lot more unskilled workforce who are not exposed, not
only unskilled.
Yeah, only unskilled, yeah. No, we have, I think, some few skilled workers in other parts, in other parts of the world. But that's a very, very tiny percentage or number. So the fact that we also have a lot of this unskilled workforce that we are exporting, if we were exporting more skilled workers versus the unskilled, do you think we would also be exposing our citizens to these kinds of vulnerabilities and abuses?
No, we wouldn't, because as Sarah said, it will be government to government. And in the unlikely event that there are few private companies, these will be regulated, and there will not be companies mobilized and organized from people's bedrooms in the Republic of Uganda in exchange of pocket dollars or perhaps a few kisses. The Filipino question is clear, because the Philippines sends predominantly to Europe, and I've got experience of some of these people, including UK. But the Filipino nurses are amongst the most desired in UK. One, because they're professional generally, but then two, they come and they're motivated like everybody else. They're mainstream, and they go as part of a gut feel of the National Health Service. So it's absolutely fine. The Ugandans you'll find in the National Health Service escapee runaways who've run away from the usual Kampala thing that Sarah and I were talking about. So really, the government action of Uganda does not benefit from them. So these people do underground escapee, and if you look at the rest, will possibly be children of refugee communities in the last 45 years. But let me tell you this. While we talk this, Ugandans on the African continent, if I contextualize, Judith, I have got experience of Ugandans in Kenya. Here, I've got experience, very terrible experience of Ugandans in Zambia. I'll tell you about Zambia, where I lived most of the time. As of today, there are hundreds of families of Ugandans, particularly from Langa, Choli, Teso, who basically sort of disappeared and have become part of the forgotten economy, particularly in Southern Africa, particularly in Zambia. With the exception of a bit of Botswana, that does relatively well for some of the people who migrated there. It's a bad thing for this country, and it's a bad thing for this continent. And in many of those cases, I know of somebody who was employed, talk about policy and government to government situations, and why, in our case, our government really doesn't care. We have people from other countries coming to do chapati here, but some of our professionals and some of our graduates cannot go ahead and do the same in neighboring countries. So some of these contradictions without and before even going to Europe. This is my view, that this matter becomes a policy discussion. Immigration and migration and employment are policy matters, and generally they're major political policy matters. Now, how you guys help me, who's the political class here, that be able to navigate these things and turn these into matters that annoy and anger Ugandans enough, to turn them into focused policy debating. I don't know. When the labor debate took place, and I think we had a similar conversation, I think about 2 years ago, these NRA guys came up and started talking about how they're trying to help on it. Part of what Sarah is saying, a consular service, a Ugandan consular service, I don't know enough anywhere where you go to a Ugandan consular mission abroad and say you're part of this and you'll necessarily get the necessary support you've got. I was with a member of parliament from NRA at a particular event, and they were trying to sort out a Ugandan who had gotten stranded from somewhere, and they're trying to make a comeback, and the Ugandan stranded is apparently also as connected as this member of parliament, and they're failing it. What about an average person from somewhere in Kisoko, who possibly finished senior 6, and then they went through the guys, sold a quarter bit of their grandfather's land to get money to bribe these people to pay the few millions that Sarah's talked about, goes away and find themselves they're completely stranded. No, we need to have much more of this conversation. But one, as a country, two, as East Africa. Why is it that we are still having a conversation in which I don't know whether a Ugandan needs a visa to go to Rwanda, or when a Ugandan goes to Rwanda, they can go and sell chapati down the road, or in Kenya. But here in Uganda is business as usual. I just don't within this African community. Maybe that's just the early part of the conversation we should be able to have. And likewise, what is the position on the free movements of people on this African continent? What is it that an average Ugandan can do if they found themselves in Nigeria?
Well, thank you. It's time for us to take a break, and then when we return, we continue with the discussion on human trafficking, labor mobility, and the rights of migrant workers. This is the Citizens Chat Show. Do stay with us.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from the break, and we're glad that you're still with us here on the Citizens Chat Show on Civic Space TV. We're streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Judith Atim, once again. And with me in the studio, I have Dr. Sarah Bireete, the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Governance, as well as Mr. Joseph Ochieno, who is a political commentator and a UPC ideologue. We are continuing with our conversation on human trafficking, labor migration, and the rights of migrant workers. And in this second session, I want us to also, I'd like to hear your thoughts and reactions to the announcement by the UAE that it would be imposing a visa ban for workers and tourists from Uganda and about 7 or 8 other countries. Of course, this takes effect in 2026, I assume in January probably. Just when we've been seeing this just in the news, less than 24 hours. That is what is playing out in the media. Just your quick thoughts and reactions to this ban, the plan by the UAE to impose this ban come next year.
Before I discuss a bit of the ban, let me explain what I've witnessed over time. I think I've been to Dubai like 3 times. Mm-hmm. Yeah, visiting, not transiting through. So one thing you learn when you land in Dubai is that majority of the citizens there are not indigenous people. They are foreigners. It's a country of migrants. There are about 160,000 indigenous people, and they live on the street. I think I'm forgetting the name, Pamela something street, with proper housing. That street has some of the best facilities in Dubai. Free housing, free water, free electricity, free medical care, and living allowance. Of course, free education. So the indigenous people, it doesn't matter whether you're working or not. I think work is a luxury, it's not a need. All your costs are paid because of the revenue the country generates. The other important aspect to note is that 50 years ago, this country didn't exist. Now about 51 or 2 years ago, didn't exist. It was a group of the different emirates under different governing. So they came together and decided to form the United Arab Emirates. And they created a governance that is not typically democratic in terms of they don't hold the elections without a bit of monarchy. Yeah, but in terms of the way, the accountability, the transparency, openness, so the only element of democracy that is missing, in my view, is the element of elections. But the other aspects of democracy, rule of law, transparency, accountability, service provision, functional institutions, free and independent functional institutions, they exist. The new product they are venturing into is medical tourism. And maybe within 3 or 5 years, you'll find that people going to Dubai, to India, Turkey for medication will have to do a shorter trip to Dubai because it's a really short trip compared to these other countries. So having said that, the new change that I realized in my last visit is an airport section for Africans. That ideally has the same luxurious facilities, because Dubai, I think, is the third busiest airport in the world, with an annual traffic of about 92 million people. So, very luxurious airport. But now they had created a new section for Africans because of the domestic workers. Facilities are the same, but the pleasantness, the luxury you would expect, because air travel is really a luxurious event, your venture, it's not so pleasant. Because you will find maybe some people have spent a number of days without a shower. Yeah, that's the kind of unpleasant, so rare in really air travel. I only
That's a
met
downgrade, really. That's
Yeah.
a big downgrade for an air traveler.
Yeah, I know. The same unpleasantness even on the plane. Maybe some of these people come from the village, they don't know anybody in Kampala. It is also a demonstration of how degraded and mistreated they are. So it's visible.
It's appetite against Africans, which is...
It's at foresight. It's not something hidden that you need to investigate. The dehumanization in all this business. And I think what led to that creation of a special section, I'm sure other travelers were complaining about this unpleasantness. If I had the choice, I wouldn't also join that section. Because also when I know, so the degradation of these people is in foresight for all of us to see. But you think leaders don't see these people as they travel? They travel with them. As much as they are in government lounges, they don't sit with them. So I'm sure they see them. If it was, so why is it that they are not concerned? So when it comes away from that, and I want to go back to your question, if you can rephrase it for me.
Yes, I was talking about the ban. The ban.
Yeah, the ban
visa,
now.
The visa ban on workers and tourists.
Yeah, because most of these people go on tourist visa. Short-term tourist visa, and it's given on arrival. Previously, you would need to get it, although it was still very easy, tour companies and whatever, but now it's just stamped on arrival. So I think with these scandals, like I said, that there's an element of rule of law in the country, a strong component of rule of law. I'm sure they want to limit the number of vulnerable people, and maybe with the time you will find that you need to demonstrate your financial ability. So they need to demonstrate to limit the nuisance around free entry and free exit in their country. So that's why we are now faced with this, because we have failed to regulate the people leaving our country to go to theirs. And I'm sure there will be procedures of like share your bank statement and the rest of it, limiting and disadvantaging the would-be genuine migrant workers if we had a normal legal regime. So what is required of the Uganda government to push off that ban is to legislate very well something that has been blocked by the powers that be that we talked about at the beginning, by Parliament, to create enabling proper laws constraining the migrant worker business exploitation and leave it for normal healthy business the way Philippines is doing, the way other countries are doing. If the vampires who benefit from this business don't step away, because in a situation of state capture, again you find some people are going to say, Mzee, I campaigned for you. Oh, Mzee, you are going to close our business. So those dubious people are highly connected. So that's why we cannot have progressive legislation in the country. And unless we clean up our house, then such bans will remain in place and increase in future.
Okay, Joseph, your thoughts about this ban? that's coming up next year?
I think it's just an indictment of and on everything we've been talking about. Why Africa and why Africans? I must also tell you something else. That until a few decades, because decades now, until a few years ago, once upon a time, Commonwealth countries did not need visas to visit Britain and all other Commonwealth countries. So Commonwealth countries, until today, some of them still remain. Now, when NRA came to power, they struck a deal with the Margaret Thatcher government that went into John Major Conservative government, and they imposed visa bans on Ugandans. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. And they did so because from NRA's perspective, they wanted to limit the number of Ugandans, although Museveni celebrated the dollars. Earlier, they wanted to limit the number of Ugandans who were going because Ugandans, particularly from the north and east, from in the war zones, were escaping. So we see some of his enemies allegedly escaping. For Britain, it was that the more Ugandans went there, the more evident for their citizens to confirm that why are many Ugandans escaping here? Because the deal was between the state of Britain and the state of Uganda, this elite politics, the kind of thing that Sarah's talking about, the cabal thing, So the British government were very desperate to show that NRA was the new Jesus of the Republic of Uganda. And so that you do through migration and through immigration, and through visa bans. So they created these visa restrictions with Uganda. Also, they've since gone ahead as immigration has continued to become a big issue. I think until today, you can still visit countries like Grenada, most of those African Caribbean countries, you do not need visas, and people still don't know this. One time, by the way, I went to a South American country, and arrived with my Ugandan passport. Obviously, we come from Britain, and we had flown business class, and we were a group of people, and I was the only black person in it, and then everybody else was producing British, maybe Irish passport things, and so I brought my Ugandan passport. And then this lady was saying, yeah? Mm-hmm. Sort of, Sarah. Sort of she hadn't heard about this country called Uganda.
Country, yeah.
But this Uganda in Africa. But,
yeah, and it happens a lot even today.
And the thing is, no need a visa or not, So you just had to go and check. Anyway, because of the mood in which I was, I didn't really want to make things. So I knew she went to go and check with the supervisor. She came back and said, yes, I did not need a visa to enter this Caribbean island. Now, granted, we as Africans behave very terribly. But it's only because we are Ugandans and only because we are Africans and the citizens of this country are on their own that the UAE government is able to do that on our people. Now, we can very easily relate it to recent incidents, and quite rightly. But the fact that the response is bang on the visa tells you, the average Ugandan, that you're alone. So, Judith, I'm refusing to respond to your question, but to emphasize a point that Ugandans need to wake up. We need to wake up, mobilize ourselves, organize ourselves, provide leadership amongst ourselves on the big issues. Mm-hmm. Create a situation in which it's actually possible that our politics across the political divide is represented by leaders, men and women, who are leaders on the basis of believing that we are part of them and they're addressing issues, the politics of issues. Because in any case, if it was in a normal democracy, the fact that these guys have imposed a visa ban, the Ugandan authorities would already have come up and made sure that every Ugandan knows that we are angry. How dare they impose visa restriction on our people? You fellow citizens, we represent you. If they impose visa restrictions unnecessarily on us, we are going to respond. Has the Ugandan authorities responded? Mm-hmm. Will they respond? Why? Because you're on own. The guys in charge at Kampala and Entebbe, no. They're doing their deals, their businesses as usual. So Ugandan citizen is on average on their own. It's massively shameful. So if the Ugandan citizens are on their own, just like the average African is on their own, I have argued severally, and my column in the New African was called Out of Africa. And variously, at the peak of some of the immigration debates, I was talking about African countries and how African citizens die in the streets of London, African citizens die in the streets of Harlem, African citizens die in the streets of Paris, and there is no problem. Yeah? Let Muzungu have a crash with the border in this particular corner of one day, you'll hear. So Ugandans, man, Africans, wake up. Did you get me? Let Muzungu be dubiously harmed in the mess that I'm talking about down under Makere Chivul.
Well, so that basically speaks to the fact that other countries attach a lot of value and importance to their citizens, which is something that we don't see happen to us.
No.
Okay.
But that's the point. Mm-hmm. So in any case, actually, you could argue visa restrictions is also an element of a power, an equipment that countries have to play their politics and their sovereignty. So part of my argument is that, well, they could do so within their sovereign rights to be able to do so, and particularly because in the Middle East, and it's not somewhere in Morocco or Guinea, I'm not able to invoke my Pan-Africanist element and agenda. But global, I believe in a global free visa world, but that is a bit of a stretch of a conversation outside this space. But for the moment, from within an African perspective, yes. But if you're talking Uganda versus the other, why are we treated like that? In any case, you've traveled to Europe as an African carrying an African passport. By the one time I traveled to a particular European country, and I came from London, and I was with all my friends and everybody else. And I was actually the most senior in that delegation. But I was holding a Ugandan passport. Mm-hmm. And because we're traveling as a group, the rest of the other people have got these European passports that I have, as I told you guys, deliberately refused to have. And then these guys went on like this. I was about to snap. Simply because I'm holding a Ugandan passport, meaning a non-European passport. I was the most authoritative person in that group of 20. Mm.
Yeah, but without Africans, a powerful document.
Without a powerful document, one, and two, because I'm black. Mm-hmm. Because what? I am black. Africans, wake up. Today, there are lighter people from African continent somewhere controlling heaps of Kampala and business as usual. As I said, as an African, I have no issues. But I reject the idea that a Ugandan is treated like a quarter citizen when you cross the borders of Congo. Yeah? But the Ugandan authority is not prepared or have the capacity to guarantee the basic rights of an average Ugandan, including a Karamojong child here in the streets of Kampala. Mm-hmm. Those are the contradictions.
So, speaking of the power difference that comes in, when a country, of course, says I'm imposing a visa ban, that's a mark of power and authority over you. And I am asking myself, how do we renegotiate but still demand for better treatment?
Who?
As a country.
I've told you that you're alone.
No, I need to also, yeah. So because there will be that time when, yes, we have to renegotiate, but are we going to have, if we are renegotiating, what should be the terms of our renegotiation?
Judith, respect is earned. Either you earn it or you don't. You cannot negotiate it. You would end up like a father, a father who is inconsequential in a family. And then you're there and say, you children, do you know that I'm your father?
Yeah, boss.
Yeah, then when you reach that level, you know that you've lost authority. Because why would you need to remind your children that you're their father? Mm-hmm. They know. Mm-hmm. So Africa must earn respect. Ugandans must earn respect. On a lighter note, as Joe was talking about the passport and whatever, you know, usually the joke with the Kenyans when we are traveling in groups is that the new Ugandan passport looks like the UN passport.
Oh,
so
the blue ones.
if you show, so they always say, you guys, you know, when there was if there was a crisis here, you know, UN staff are rescued first. Then you put up your passport, for example. Then you be rescued.
So Uganda will just do that. You took the back of the passport. Blue.
You'll be rescued, then they will find out after rescuing you. So yeah, but so that's the lighter side of it.
Thank you, decision makers, for making our passport blue. That at least is a trick. So we are not as lonely as we thought.
Yeah, but on a serious note,
Oh, gosh.
I think Ugandan African people, and we are all in this same rat box, rat hole, because the stories of exploitation, sex exploitation in Kenya, mistreatment of workers in Kenya. If you're watching Kenya and you're like, Uganda and Kenya is
West
in the
Africa,
same post.
Yeah.
People, families fundraising for money to rescue people who are illegally detained out of this harassment. It's the same story. BBC documentaries on the Kenyan people have gone for domestic work. Same script. So it's not just that it's Uganda. Most of the African states, or what I would call client states, because they are really not independent states as in real sense. Their citizens find themselves in this rat hole because of vampire, selfish leaders. I believe every African country, including the poorest, have capacity to afford their citizens decent lives. But because the leadership is just, they have a different agenda, and the people are by the way. So if there is a program like PDM, it's a by the way. After all, to remind, it's just 1 trillion out of the 72 trillion budget. So what is the 71 trillion? When you don't have roads, when you don't have medicine in hospitals, when we don't have proper funding for government schools, 20,000 a year for UPE, meaning 7,000 shillings per child per term. What can you do with that money? Then you're going to see the president making himself busy during campaign saying, arrest the teachers who charge money. Can his children even, or grandchildren, feed on 7,000 even for breakfast? They can't. It's not even enough. His state house spends 2 point something billion per day. But he wants Ugandan children to be educated at 7,000 shillings a term. The teachers are on the strike. How many people are going to drop out of this strike, you know, because they're also fighting for equal pay that our countries can't afford. So where does this 72 trillion, if you remove 1 trillion peanuts that are thrown at people as a by the way, in the so much celebrated PDM, where a president spends 2 billion to inspect a few villages, instead of leaving this money to go to the people. Leaders are now, on every occasion, decrying poor roads. Shameless leaders, part of the vampire system. The other day, a minister was very comfortable, but I think she didn't even know the scandal of whatever she was making. On a barrier saying, you see, if I had driven by road, maybe I could have known, but I no longer drive by road because of these portals. I fly, you know, and they find it normal. Cabinet ministers. The president sent me here, he gave me a helicopter, but I refused, drove, and discovered bad roads, and they think it's a discovery. When the Minister of Finance, when the Prime Minister and all these other senior ministers use this road, same very road, and then she's posturing, giving fake orders. I have ordered the Minister of Finance, fix the roads, as if a speaker has power to order the Minister of Finance at a cultural function. So you have this mess of vampire leaders that cannot take care of its youth, that cannot take care of its citizens, and the people must wake up. So it is not about laws, it's about the people must wake up and demand proper leadership. In the absence of that, you are going to drown in the Antarctic Ocean, you are going to die in the Middle East, running away from your countries and your leaders.
Still on the issue of the visa ban, I think one of the concerns that I'm seeing coming up a lot in media conversations online is to the effect that what does this then mean to the thousands of other people who have approached these labor externalization agencies. The documents are being processed and they've put so much money. Who is going to hold them accountable? Where are they going to find redress? Who is coming to their aid?
Sarah's just said, mobilize, organize, and hold the leaders to account. Hold your legislators to account, mobilize and organize and say that unless we are able to address the underlying issues, you're not going to vote for these NRA guys. Actually, considering the state, the stage of the election cycle we are, you can actually turn this into a major election matter and then put these guys on the defensive. We need to be able to address the underlying issues, Judith. And as I said earlier, you provide the basic education, basic decent education that this country has ever provided before Museveni came to power. You provide that basic decent education, and including where it's primary, secondary school, and you talk free education. The subsidy that government provided primary school education before UPE was more than 7,000 before these guys came to power. And people need to put that in context. It was more than 7,000. Education in this country before NRA came to power.
And by then, it had more value.
And I was going to come to that. Primary education was not free but subsidized. But what government gave was more than equivalent to 7,000. All level education was not free, but the subsidy the government gave was more than what government provides today. Every other education, Judith, was free. But side by side with that, including primary education, you had the schools, you had the classrooms, you had the scholastic materials, you had school compounds that spread, quality education, and you had decent teachers, and they had decent pay. So meaning that we have had better before the size of the economy that we're talking about today. Meaning it's actually possible. So Ugandans need to be able to know what the situation is at the moment, what it was before, demand that they want better and more going forward. So people need to be able to mobilize and organize around that. And as I suggest, from a UPC perspective, I would just recommend that in a future UPC government would make sure that we provide quality, decent education, as we did before, but more and better, including focus on ICT and others today. Provide basic health care so that people really, because those are the cushions people are looking for to go and get exploited abroad. Basic health care, guarantee in terms of public housing and education, public housing, as I said. Make sure that people who graduate get jobs. That happened in this country before, and it's actually possible for us to be able to do so. In terms of the size of unemployment, Sarah, one of the things that the Indians did, as recent as actually 15 years ago, I managed a call center before in UK, and some of these things were being done by India. What did India do? You educate, you create call center economies inside your own country. But one of the things that you also do with the non-economist is you create jobs. In work domestic investment. Other than giving money, Judith, to Bireete, you create an environment in which Bireete's ex-husband or boyfriend, brings a few billion euros, sets up in Uganda inward investments, for a Toyota plant, for arguments, creates jobs, pumps money in Uganda's economy. That in part what India did. So meaning the Indian skilled workers get jobs here. China in part did that. That's what you do. So clearly, why? They will be bringing those companies here because Uganda, they will know, will have relatively cheaper labor, but highly skilled because they've been educated by us in Bireete, for argument's sake. That is how it is done. So you do that, as I said, Judith, at 80% cheaper. An average Ugandan will leave America and come home to their home to work from here. But side by side with that, if you cushion, there's no reason why the vast lands that we've got in Acholi land, people don't go to agriculture, indigenous agriculture, because they're going to get soft loans. In fact, grants, something that governments did. not mobilizing Balalo who've been chased for whatever dubious reason from Tanzania into Uganda. So you do that. So the more you do that, the less likely it will be for an average Ugandan to want to leave the land and soil of Uganda. Now, if you do that and integrate it from an East African policy perspective, it grows. And if you're able to do that from a continental perspective, this is the richest continent with the hugest amount of the natural resources, hugest best in terms of climate. And there's no reason why we don't stem this thing. Now, for visa, as Sarah said, what do you do? What have you got to offer? These guys, one, they don't have the political will, nor do they have the economic muscle, or even the vision to say, hang on a second, let's even pretend with these Arab guys and say that we play tough, talk tough. They don't. They don't have the will, they don't have the muscle, and in some cases, I believe some of their top guys do not have a clue what to do.
Thank you. Let me come to you on the labor exporting agencies and the people who are now stuck with them. Had you already responded to that? No.
No, yeah, but most of, like I had already said, most of the companies engaged in labor export are highly connected. Some of them don't fulfill the minimum
basic,
requirements. We have the platform for labor action that engages with them in charge of, like watching out for migrant workers' rights. Over the aggressive campaigns after the exposure of mistreatment, there has been a slight change in terms of legal compliance. But our legal regime is weak. First of all, we need to strengthen the foundation of compliance, which is the legal regime. We need to put this, obligation. For me, I like what, benchmarking from what has worked for other people. Let's create a labor export commission. People are always, after all, these patronage people will get jobs, but can they do good work? Give it clear terms of reference. So whichever company is working on this, let them first present their agreements. So agreements are done through this labor commission. Let the companies be agents, earning commission for their effort. Let it be government obligation to protect the people because it has gone out of hand. Then from there, we also need the overseas labor commission, which can sit at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
And attached to our embassies.
Yes, since most of our migrant labor are going to the Middle East, you can place it in one of the countries in the Middle East. And then it opens satellite offices in the countries which are most affected, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Jordan, and then Qatar. I think they're like 4 or 5 countries already. Have satellite offices, make sure you protect people. It's a right of Ugandans to earn a living globally. Wherever they can export their skills, formal or informal, it's their right to earn. But how do we protect them? How do we protect them from all this nuisance happening of improper, inhuman things that are, and we can't even speak about on this show.
No. And if I can just add something that is interestingly, as Sarah says, really partly because of impunity, and partly because we know that many of these companies are associated with people's living rooms and corridors. It is actually genuinely possible, and we're giving them free advice. It's actually genuinely possible that you can actually still make it relatively private, But if you're focusing on the basic needs and rather the needs of our people within a regulatory framework, there is no reason why government does not play the oversight role, and these companies remain private so long as they meet the basic conditions. Interestingly, most other developed nations, if say an American president is say traveling to India, most of the plane beyond the journalists who follow them will be business people, Sarah. Away from the business community that they will count on, 90% will then be private. Yeah? And those private people, what do governments do? Governments are saying that we're bringing these people because we know they're going to create jobs for our people. When they become successful, our people will succeed. So you do that from such a manner, in such a manner that, part of your connections does not really lose as long as they do the right things. Maybe just to clarify. It does not necessarily have to be removed from these guys completely. But so long as they're doing the right things for our people. But they will not do that because, as I said, because of impunity. They know that you, the Ugandan citizen, you're not organized enough, nor do you have the capacity to challenge. So, they can use and abuse you as they so wish. But for a country that led amongst the few countries that led for the emancipation of the African continent in terms of freedoms of our people, that 60 years after independence, we are talking about, our governments officially sanctioning and enabling and equipping, slavery and exploitation of our citizens. It's extremely sad.
So I think we just have a few minutes to go, and I'd just like to hear your final thoughts on this topic. As we move forward, what should be the best, most appropriate course of action that works? Of course, the labor externalization agencies want to make their money. The Ugandans want to offer their labor, try their luck elsewhere. How do we move?
And the duty of government is to regulate, is to protect. So my parting comments really are that one, and fundamentally, governance is a demand-driven process. Good governance, just like the law, is not going to find us in our beds where we hide for the night. We must get on our feet and demand that this country is governed in a normal way. And unless we have that aggregate demand from the people, then we shall keep counting victim after victim of our children dying in these Middle East countries, of our children being abducted, of our children being killed on the streets, of corruption, of abuse of human rights. It will be an endless story of lamentations. You Ugandans, why can't you mobilize and demand? What's wrong with you? Today it's somebody's sister or brother or child. Tomorrow it will be yours. It's just a matter of time. These vampire leaders do not care about what we go through. We have to demand and squeeze them out of their comfort.
Thank you. And you, Joseph?
Activism works. Activism works. And activism is not negative. Activism is basic responsibility, and particularly for the socially conscious African, the socially conscious Ugandan. Activism is really part of your faith, and including that average Ugandan who attends church and mosques, in terms of community. The idea that there is a Ugandan next door who's being used and abused, and you put your eye at the other end, and you do not seek to engage, which is basically what the activism we're talking about today, is irresponsible. Sarah is saying that in the event that Ugandans mobilize and organize and say no and demand from the respective authorities, it works. One of the few cases where I intervened was a case of a girl in Jordan. She reached out to me via Facebook. By then I was actually somewhere else, living in Uganda. And I managed to organize with her, use Facebook. It was very difficult at the time. And over a period of 6, 7, 8 days, I think, I got her rescued. I had another, somebody whom initially, when she came to me, I thought it was even a scam, one of these people trying to scam you. Again, another woman suffering, this woman from the East was left 3 children, and she had already been scammed, both, meaning scam, her money had been taken up by a certain section of her family members, the export company here at Kampala, and she was being abused in the Middle East. That particular case, you imagine, I make a concluding remark.
And there are so many of those, yeah.
I managed to get through to the company here, spoke to a lady boss, and her matter was resolved within 2 days. Activism works. Intervention works. These companies, although we're talking impunity, many of these companies actually don't want us to put them on the spot. So I'm simply saying that the best that we can do is turn this into national conversation. Thank you guys, particularly, like you in the media spaces, to be able to have this kind of conversation. I think we need to encourage more of it. But I think next time you need to be able to put political leaders on the spot and make sure that these are manifesto commitment positions, and simply say that, well, any future political party that really claims leadership in the future should have a question of migration and forced migration and use and exploitation of our people as part of a manifesto commitment, and that they should be challenged on their position on many of these things, expose these things, but also maybe as in terms of civic activism, Sarah, that you guys engage more on this in universities and colleges and institutions in terms of not only civic awareness, but in terms of civic responsibility for many of our people. That some of our young graduates will think that they are safe from this, but once they're able to get the jobs and they don't, once they're able to graduate and they don't have anywhere to go, some of them may be tempted, particularly the girl ones, may be tempted to go into these spaces. So we need to be able to address these other things, especially from the way Angwesar is trying to say that whatever happens, we need the strengthening of institutional framework, and that's the role of government.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to the both of you, Dr. Sarah Bireete, and to you, Mr. Joseph Ochieno. I have been your host, Judith Atim. Thank you very much to all of you who've tuned in to watch. We've been discussing this very important conversation, human trafficking, labor migration, and the rights of migrant workers. Do have your say in the comment section. Let us know what you think about this. And the Citizens Chat Show returns next week, same time. Do join us then.